Okay. So this is week 8, and we are finishing up with our diagnostic coding. We have made it all the way through our ICD-10 1990 or 2019. Although realistically, the guidelines and things are going to be the same whether we're using 2019, 2020, 2021, looking in the future. Okay, so for this week 8, we are going over the signs and symptoms. We are going over injury and poisoning. Also external causes, the external cause index, and Z codes. So, okay, sorry, I don't interruption. All right, so external causes index is chapter 20 in our code book, and then we are going to do the Z codes, chapter 21, which we've kind of already been doing for quite a while now, but this is the official chapter. All right, so this is kind of where outpatient diagnostic coding begins, because a lot of times when you're looking at signs and symptoms, this is because they don't know what's wrong yet and that they haven't had time to study it. So if you're going into a doctor's office and you've got a cough and you're vomiting and you've got a fever and a headache, they don't always know what it is. And let's say they pull blood or do something like that and you leave and they still don't know what's wrong. You know, they're trying to find out what's wrong. And let's just say for some reason you never came back. Then they can't actually tell you what's wrong. So they would record a sign or symptom when they're doing that. That's just, it's basic math. But like I said, that's if you don't have an official diagnosis. When they're just given a list of symptoms, then those are going to be your R's, all right? So those are going to come from your chapter 18 in your code book, all right? But like I said, it's basic math, main term, alphabetic index, tabular. What they're there for. In this case, it's not actually after study because this is, you know, why are they here? These are the symptoms. So that's where that comes from. All right, so that's chapter 18. It's really, I don't want to say simple, but it is not complex. There are not nearly as many guidelines as there were in pregnancy chapters, or even in the neoplasm chapters, or the infectious disease chapters. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go on to chapter 22, or chapter 19, injury, poisoning, and certain other consequences of external causes. Chapter 19. So injury, let's talk about injury first. Injury is something like a burn. Most of the other injuries are pretty self-explanatory. Lacerations, hemorrhaging, epidural hemorrhaging, those kind of things, just basic injuries, cuts, those type of things. Open wounds. So that is going to be here. But burns, when you're talking about burns, you're going to code to the highest degree. You know, when we're coding, we want to get to the maximum amount, because the higher the degree, the more we had to work, the more money we're going to get for having to do that. So if you have someone who has a 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree burn in the same area, like, you know, the upper arm, they have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree on the upper arm, you're going to code the 3rd degree burn to the upper arm. If they have a 3rd degree burn to the upper arm and a 1st degree burn on the lower, then you're going to code, you'll have 2 codes. You'll have the 3rd degree on the upper and the 1st degree on the lower. But if they're in the same spot, you're going to code to the highest burn level, 1st, 2nd, 3rd. So whichever one is the highest, if it's in the same spot. Once again, very important. So the other part of chapter 19, you have injury, and injury is self-explanatory. You know, you got cuts, bruises, lacerations, those kind of things. The other part is poisoning. Okay, and this is where it's going to take a little bit more, I don't know, not more effort, but it's just a little bit different, because instead of it being mat, we are not going to go to the alphabetic index. We are going to go to the table of drugs and chemicals. Okay, table of drugs and chemicals. All right, so when we are here, when we're looking at poisonings, that's going to be here. Okay, anytime you have anything that has a drug involved, you're going to go to the table of drugs and chemicals. So let's actually talk about terminology when we're talking about this chapter. So when you're looking in your little columns here, you actually have several different sections. You have poisoning, accidental, unintentional. You have poisoning, intentional, self-harm, meaning you did to yourself. You have poisoning assault, which means someone did it to someone else. You have poisoning undetermined. So we're not really sure if it was self-harm or it was poisoning. We have adverse effects and we have underdosing. All right, so let's talk about those. All right, so when you're talking about an adverse effect is a side effect. Okay, you were doing everything right. You took your medicine the way it was supposed to. You took it the times that you were supposed to. You took the amount that you were supposed to. But you still got a rash. Okay, that's a side effect. Everything was done the way it was supposed to, but something happened because of that. So that would be an adverse effect. Okay, side effect, adverse effect, it's the same thing. When you do this, you are going to code the side effect first, because that's really why you're there. You're not there, like you had you had something where you had to rub a topical cream on your hand. And then, every night you had to rub it because of something. And then all of a sudden it broke out in all these hives. The reason that you went to the doctor today is because of the hives, not because of the original reason you had the cream. That's why the side effect is going to be first. Okay, so you code the side effect first, then you code what's on the table. All right, so code your side effect, and then you're going to code it being a side effect of what. So what drug or chemical was that a side effect? You're still going to go to the tabular afterwards to make sure that you've gotten everything covered because of the notes and stuff that are included in the tabular that are so important to getting the correct code. You're going to code all of the side effects if there's more than one, and you're going to code all of the drugs that were involved. Okay, all the drugs that you're taking or that could have affected that. So that's an adverse effect, side effect, adverse effect. Okay, then you have poison. Poison is if there's something wrong. Okay, the first thing you're going to do in the poison is you're going to go to the table. So instead of starting with the side effect and looking it up, doing the mat with the side effect, you're going to start with the chemical. Okay, so you're going to go to the table of drugs and chemicals. That's where you're going to start. You're going to code the condition. So you're, whatever is there, what's the condition of it. Code dependency also if it's needed. So if they're addicted to that, then you're going to do that. It's fairly self-explanatory when you're looking at the different columns. It will say in there whether or not the poisoning was self-harm. What's another word for self-harm? An overdose is a lot of times what that's called. If it's undetermined, then you make sure that you do that. Don't just code, like I said, what is in the code, what's in the column. Always make sure you go back to the tabular. That's always your last step to get everything that's included in it. And really, that's just kind of the main thing is knowing what you are working with. Just knowing what's something like, okay, well, sorry, and then I did actually miss one. Underdosing, that's exactly what it sounds like. A lot of times underdosing comes from people who can't afford the whole thing. So let's say someone has a heart issue and they can't afford to get, they can maybe afford to get 4 or 5 of the pills, but they can't afford to get the whole 30 that it would take for a month. So they end up going back into the hospital or back into the doctor because they weren't using their medication the way that they should be. That's what underdosing is going to be. All right. Okay, so that is chapter 19. All right, so, and if you look at it, chapter 19 is kind of one of the bigger chapters. All right, so we're going to move on to chapter 20, the external causes of morbidity. And this is sort of it's statistics, okay? So these are statistics that the government uses when they're, looking at certain things. It's also, you can sometimes get out of paying, depending on where it happened. But it's some kind of activity that you're doing. There's a couple ones when you're looking at this. You have what, you have where, you have kind, you have the place of occurrence, and you have a status. Okay, so it's, like I said, it's relatively simple when you're looking at it. Always make sure that you look at the pink boxes. Pink boxes are very important in chapter 19 too, when you're talking about the different types of injuries. But you will notice that whatever it is, always go to the pink box that's in front of it. So if you need a pink box for that 7th character, always go, whether the initial encounter, a subsequent encounter, or a sequela, you would do that. But it talks about accidents. Most of the time these are the kind of accidents. So you would just look in there, and like I said, there's kind, where, what, place of occurrence, and the status of the person involved in the accident, whether they were a student, whether or not they were an employer, those kind of things. Y99 are going to be your statuses. Then you're going to have W's and V's, mostly V's, as your actual code. Okay, these are not codes that are ever primary except in this chapter because we're studying it, but these are further explanations. Where were we? What were we doing? External cause codes. Okay, so that's pretty much all we can talk about on that one. Okay, and then chapter 21, so this is the last chapter. These are the Z codes. This is where there's not something wrong, but coming in, not conditions, these are reasons. Okay, so this is not a condition, this is a reason. It's basic MAT. That's kind of, the way that you handle it. And, hormone sensitivity, malignancy. Person with potential health hazards related to a communicable disease. Estrogen reception status. Encounter for procreative management. I mean, these are a bunch of different, these are just kind of all the factors that influence other things, that influence the health status. So other than that, there's not that many guidelines for it. It's just your basic MAT, main term, alphabetic index, tabular. They are rarely the primary code. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head is when we were talking about the baby, and how that Z38 code was the baby's first code ever, and it's only ever coded for that one once, that child once, that person once. And that's the only time I can really think of when it's going to be primary, except if it's an encounter. So basically, encounters go into the doctors. And that, I think, is it for these last 4 chapters. If you need me, text me. I will be happy to answer any questions and walk you through it. I actually have an iPhone, so if you need to FaceTime me and show me your computer and show me your book, we can do that as well. Or you can email me at jonesre@uamont.edu. And if you need to text me, 870-265-1509. All right.